The operating room clock read 8:47 p.m. when Dr. Thomas Bradley's gloved hands began to tremble on the steel table before him. Rob Mitchell's flesh had turned the color of rotting fruit. Black tissue spread across his neck and shoulder like an oil spill consuming a shoreline, creeping toward his chest with every passing minute. "We're running out of time," Dr. Rachel Foster said, her voice tight. "It's moving toward his heart." Bradley gripped the scalpel. One question burned in his mind: remove the arm or let the man die. Outside the operating room, Sarah Mitchell knelt on cold linoleum, clutching a positive pregnancy test in her white-knuckled fist. 8 weeks pregnant. Her husband didn't even know yet, 96 hours ago. Rob had done nothing more than pop a small pimple after his evening workout. Now bacteria were eating him alive. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Robert Mitchell had hands that told stories, calloused palms from 20 years of construction work, scarred knuckles from countless projects, strong fingers that could grip a hammer for 12 hours straight without complaint. At 42, he stood 6 feet tall with the broad shoulders of a man who earned his living through physical labor, and he wore his strength like armor against the world. Every weekday evening at 6 o'clock sharp, Rob pulled his pickup truck into the Planet Fitness parking lot on Sawmill Road in Columbus, Ohio. 4 days a week without fail, rain or shine, holidays included, the gym was his temple, his sanctuary from the stresses of project deadlines and demanding clients. He'd pump iron for 90 minutes, pushing his body to its limits, then drive home, feeling invincible. That feeling of invincibility had been planted in him long ago. His father, Kevin, a Vietnam veteran with a Purple Heart and an iron will, had raised Rob on a steady diet of stoic masculinity. Pain is weakness, leaving the body. Son, real men don't complain. You shake it off and keep moving. Those words had been branded into Rob's consciousness like cattle markings, shaping him into a man who viewed doctors with suspicion and hospitals as places for the truly weak. Home was a modest 3-bedroom colonial on a tree-lined street in Westerville, a suburb where neighbors still waved at each other and kids played in yards until sunset. Rob had bought it 10 years ago, right after marrying Sarah, the petite brunette with kind eyes, who worked as a nurse at Riverside Methodist Hospital. She'd fallen in love with his protective nature, his reliability, his old-fashioned commitment to providing for his family. He'd fallen for her gentle patience, her ability to see through his tough exterior to the softer man beneath. Their daughter Emma arrived 6 years ago, a miracle, with her father's stubborn chin and her mother's compassionate heart. From the moment Rob first held her, something in him shifted. This tiny creature with fingers no bigger than matchsticks had cracked open his carefully constructed armor. Every night, without exception, he'd scoop Emma onto his shoulders, her delighted squeals echoing through their home as he galloped through the living room, pretending to be her noble steed. His right arm, thick as a tree branch, would hold her steady while she gripped his hair and laughed until tears streamed down her cheeks. Life had settled into comfortable rhythms. Mortgage payments of $2,400 monthly, always paid early. Health insurance premiums of $800 that Rob grumbled about but maintained. A savings account with $15,000 for emergencies. Though Rob privately believed emergencies were for other families, not his. They attended Grace Community Church most Sundays, hosted neighborhood barbecues, coached Emma's soccer team, the American dream, carefully constructed and fiercely protected. Sarah had been trying to find the right moment for weeks now. The pregnancy test hidden in her dresser drawer showed two unmistakable pink lines, 8 weeks along. She'd planned to tell Rob on their anniversary, just days away, imagining his face transforming from shock to joy as he processed the news of a second child. But she never got the chance. The Monday evening sun hung low over Maple Street, casting long shadows across the worn shingles of Martha Henderson's roof. Rob had noticed the blue tarp flapping in the wind for 3 days now, a temporary patch over damage from last week's thunderstorm. At 78 years old, Martha lived alone in the small Cape Cod she'd shared with her late husband for 43 years. Her children had scattered to distant states, calling occasionally but rarely visiting. The widow survived on Social Security checks that barely covered utilities, let alone emergency home repairs. Rob had been loading his truck after work when he spotted Martha standing in her driveway, staring up at the damaged section with obvious distress, without hesitation. He'd walked over, assessed the situation, and made the offer before she could even ask. That's what neighbors just do. He'd told her, "Don't even think about paying me. I've got spare shingles in my garage and the tools in my truck." The August heat was punishing as Rob climbed the aluminum ladder propped against Martha's gutters. Sweat soaked through his gray T-shirt within minutes, dripping from his forehead into his eyes as he worked. The old tin roofing along the edges had rusted into jagged formations, sharp as broken glass. He worked methodically, removing damaged shingles, laying fresh tar paper, nailing new materials into place. 3 hours of careful labor under the relentless sun. He'd nearly finished when it happened. Reaching for his hammer, his jaw brushed against a curled piece of tin roofing. The metal edge sliced across his chin like a razor, quick and clean. Rob jerked back instinctively, touching the wound with his fingertips. Blood, but not much. Maybe half an inch long, shallow enough that it would close on its own. Down below, Martha watched with concerned eyes. "You all right up there?" she called out. Rob waved dismissively, wiping the blood with the back of his hand. "Just a scratch, ma'am. Almost done here." He finished the last few shingles, gathered his tools, and descended the ladder with the satisfaction of a job well done. Martha met him at the bottom with a glass of sweet tea and her famous apple pie, still warm from the oven. Rob tried to refuse the pie, but she insisted with the gentle forcefulness that only elderly women possess. "God bless you, young man," she said, her weathered hands pressing the dish into his. "You have a good heart. Your parents raised you right." Josh smiled at the compliment, though it stirred complicated feelings about his father. He thanked Martha, promised to check on her after the next storm, and headed home. In his bathroom, he splashed water on the cut, watching pink-tinged liquid swirl down the drain. No need for antiseptic or bandages. The wound was nothing, really, just a scratch from helping an old lady fix her roof. He'd had worse injuries from opening stubborn pickle jars. 3 days passed without incident. The cut scabbed over, becoming just another minor mark on a body covered in the evidence of a working man's life. Rob forgot about it entirely, his mind occupied with work deadlines and family routines. Thursday evening arrived with its familiar rhythm. Rob pulled into the Planet Fitness lot at exactly 6:15, later than usual, due to a project meeting that ran long. Inside the gym buzzed with the after-worker crowd, clanking weights and humming treadmills creating a symphony of exertion. Rob claimed his usual bench, loaded the barbell, and began his routine. Tonight, he pushed harder than normal. Compensation for the stressful week, deadlifts until his forearms burned, bench presses with weight that made his shoulders scream, squats that turned his thighs to trembling rubber, sweat poured from every pore, soaking his shirt, dripping onto equipment. He wiped his face repeatedly with the communal gym towel, never thinking twice about the bacteria thriving in its fibers, never considering that his opened pores and minor wounds created perfect entry points for infection. After 90 minutes, Rob hit the showers. The hot water soothed his aching muscles, washing away the physical evidence of his exertion. He dressed in the locker room, standing before the foggy mirror to check his appearance before heading home. That's when he noticed it. On his chin, right where the cut from Martha's roof had been healing, a small bump had formed, whitehead visible, skin around it slightly pink. Rob leaned closer, examining the blemish with mild annoyance. Probably from all the sweating, he reasoned. Clogged pore, gym grime. Nothing unusual about getting a pimple after an intense workout. Happened all the time, without hesitation. Rob raised both hands to his face, his thumbnails positioned on either side of the bump. He applied pressure. The pimple resisted momentarily, then burst with a mixture of pus and blood emerged, more than he'd expected from something so small. A sharp sting followed, brief but noticeable. Rob grabbed a paper towel, dabbed at the wound, and examined his handiwork. The bump had flattened, leaving only a small red mark. He rinsed his face with cold water, applied a small adhesive bandage from his gym bag, and headed home. Total time spent on the pimple 3 seconds. 3 seconds that would nearly cost him everything. Dinner that evening was pot roast, Emma's favorite. Rob helped clear the table, gave his daughter a horsey ride through the living room, and settled onto the couch with Sarah to watch television. His chin throbbed slightly, but he attributed it to the aggressive popping. By 10 o'clock, exhaustion from his workout pulled him toward bed. Sarah mentioned he looked tired, suggested he might be coming down with something. Rob dismissed her concern with a kiss on her forehead. Just tired from the gym. Honey, nothing sleep won't fix. He fell asleep by 11, unaware that beneath his skin microscopic invaders had found their entry point. The bacteria that had likely lived harmlessly on old roofing materials, transferred to his chin through the cut, then pushed deeper into his tissue when he'd popped the pimple. Now began their deadly multiplication. Streptococcus pyogenes, Group A strep, one of nature's most aggressive flesh-eating organisms, started its feast. By midnight, the first visible sign appeared. A ring of redness around the bandage, perhaps an inch in diameter. Rob leapt through it, his body not yet recognizing the threat. His immune system, strong as it was, had no idea what was coming. The bacteria released toxins that destroyed tissue faster than white blood cells could respond, creating a cascade of destruction that would accelerate with terrifying speed. The clock had started its countdown, hour 0, of what would become the fight of Rob Mitchell's life. And he had absolutely no idea. Friday morning arrived with cruel sunshine streaming through the bedroom curtains. Rob's eyes fluttered open at 6 o'clock, his internal alarm clock as reliable as ever. But something felt wrong. His body ached with a heaviness that exceeded normal post-workout soreness. When he sat up, the room tilted slightly, and a wave of nausea rolled through his stomach. He touched his forehead, finding it warm and clammy. Fever. His chin throbbed with a dull, persistent pain that radiated into his jaw. Rob stumbled to the bathroom mirror and peeled back the adhesive bandage. What he saw gave him momentary pause. The redness had expanded to nearly 2 inches in diameter, and the center, where he'd popped the pimple, looked angrier than before, slightly swollen with a purplish tinge. Sarah appeared in the bathroom doorway, her nurse's instincts immediately activated. She crossed the small space and examined his chin with practiced eyes. Her fingers gentle but probing. "Rob, this doesn't look right," she said, concern evident in her voice. "The redness is spreading. You should see a doctor today." Rob pulled away from her touch, irritation flaring. "It's just an infected pimple, Sarah. Happens all the time. I'll put some antibiotic ointment on it, and it'll clear up. Stop worrying so much." She pressed further, suggesting urgent care or at least calling their family physician. But Rob had already made up his mind. Real men don't run to doctors for every little thing. His father's voice echoed in his head, that familiar refrain that had shaped decades of behavior. He'd survived worse than this. A small infection wasn't going to sideline him. Sarah's jaw tightened with frustration, but she knew that look in her husband's eyes. 20 years of nursing had taught her to recognize signs of serious infection, and something about this wound troubled her deeply. But Rob's stubbornness was legendary, passed down through generations of Mitchell men like a genetic inheritance. "Fine," she said finally, her voice tight with suppressed worry. "But if it gets any worse, you're going to the hospital. Promise me." Rob nodded, eager to end the discussion. He swallowed 2 Tylenol tablets, applied triple antibiotic ointment to the wound, and covered it with a fresh bandage. By 7 o'clock, he was dressed for work in his usual jeans and company polo, determined to push through whatever this was. Sarah left for her morning shift at the hospital, her parting glance filled with unspoken concern. She wanted to call in sick, to stay home and monitor her husband, but they couldn't afford the lost wages. Not with the mortgage and insurance premiums and Emma's upcoming school expenses. She kissed him goodbye, made him promise again to call if symptoms worsened, and drove away with a knot in her stomach that wouldn't loosen. At the construction site, Rob struggled through the morning hours. His concentration wavered, thoughts scattering like leaves in wind. Simple calculations that normally took seconds required minutes of focused effort. His foreman noticed his pale complexion, the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air-conditioned office trailer. Marcus Thompson, a fellow project manager and Rob's perpetual office rival, made a snide comment during the morning meeting. "You look like death warmed over. Mitchell, maybe lay off the gym for once." Rob snapped back with uncharacteristic sharpness, telling Marcus to mind his own business. The exchange left an uncomfortable silence in the conference room. By lunchtime, Rob could barely focus on his computer screen. His temperature had climbed higher, and the pain in his chin had intensified to a constant, burning sensation. He skipped lunch entirely, his stomach too unsettled for food. At 3 o'clock, his supervisor pulled him aside, expressing concern about his obvious illness. "Take the rest of the day off." "Rob, you're no good to anyone like this." Rob drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting waves of dizziness. The world seemed slightly off-kilter, colors too bright, sounds too loud. He told himself it was just a bad flu, maybe food poisoning. His body would fight it off by morning. He just needed rest. The house was empty when he arrived. Sarah still at work, Emma at her after-school program. Rob collapsed onto the living room couch, too exhausted to climb the stairs to bed. He kicked off his boots and lay back, closing his eyes against the throbbing in his head. Sleep came quickly, pulling him into fitful dreams where shadowy figures chased him through endless corridors. Sarah found him there at 6 o'clock, still in his work clothes, burning with fever. She pressed her palm to his forehead, her expression shifting from concern to alarm. 100.8 degrees, the thermometer confirmed, and when she removed the bandage from his chin, she had to stifle a gasp. The infected area had grown to 3 inches across. The center had darkened to a deep purple, almost black in places. More disturbing was the pain response when she gently touched the surrounding skin. Rob jerked away violently, crying out. The pain was disproportionate to the wound's appearance, a classic warning sign that sent ice through Sarah's veins. "Rob, we need to go to the emergency room right now," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "This is serious. This could be a severe skin infection." He struggled to sit up, his head swimming. "It's Friday night. The ER will be packed. We'll wait hours just to see someone who'll prescribe antibiotics. Just get me some stronger painkillers and let me sleep it off." Their argument escalated, Sarah's fear manifesting as anger, Rob's denial hardening into obstinance. Emma came downstairs, drawn by their raised voices, her small face pinched with worry. The sight of his daughter's distress softened Rob slightly. "Look," he said, his voice hoarse. "If it's worse in the morning, I'll go. I promise. Just let me rest tonight, please." Against every professional instinct, screaming in her head, Sarah relented, but she extracted promises he would drink fluids, take fever reducers on schedule, and she would check the wound every 2 hours. Rob agreed to everything, wanting only to close his eyes and escape into sleep. Emma approached cautiously. "Daddy, are you sick?" Rob attempted a reassuring smile. "Just a little bug. Princess B. Daddy will be fine by morning." She wanted her evening horsey ride, her face hopeful. But when Rob tried to stand, pain shot through his body like electricity. He sank back onto the couch, unable to hide his grimace. "Not tonight, sweetie. Daddy's too tired." The disappointment in Emma's eyes cut deeper than any physical pain. In 6 years, he'd never refused her that ritual. She shuffled away to watch television, glancing back at her father with confusion and hurt. Sarah guided her upstairs for dinner and homework, leaving Rob alone with his stubbornness and his rapidly advancing infection. Throughout the evening, Sarah checked the wound religiously. Each time, her concern deepened. The redness crept outward like spilled ink on paper, gaining perhaps half an inch every hour. The tissue felt indurated, hardened beneath her fingertips in a way that spoke of serious inflammation. The smell had changed too, subtly but distinctly, carrying a faint sweetness that experienced nurses recognized as tissue beginning to die. She barely slept that night, lying beside her husband as he tossed and moaned in fevered dreams. His skin radiated heat like a furnace. Several times she nearly called 911, her phone in hand, finger hovering over the numbers. But Rob would wake briefly, insist he was fine, beg her to let him rest just a little longer. Across the street, Martha Henderson noticed the lights burning in the Mitchell house all night. She'd seen Rob's truck in the driveway since late afternoon. Unusual for a Friday when the family typically went out for dinner. Something felt wrong, but she didn't want to intrude. She said a small prayer for her young neighbor who'd been so kind to her, hoping whatever kept those lights burning would resolve itself by morning. Inside his fevered mind, Rob's thoughts spiraled. I've been through worse than this. Dad never complained about pain. This is nothing. Just need to sleep it off. Stop being weak. The internal dialogue repeated like a broken record, drowning out the alarm bells his body desperately tried to ring. But Rob's body wasn't fighting a minor infection. The bacteria had established a beachhead in his tissue, releasing toxins that dissolved fascia, the connective tissue surrounding muscles. This wasn't weakness leaving his body. This was death entering it. Saturday morning broke gray and overcast, matching the atmosphere inside the Mitchell household. Rob woke at 8 o'clock to find himself alone in bed, the sheets beneath him soaked with sweat. For a moment, he couldn't remember how he'd gotten upstairs. Then fragmented memories surfaced of Era helping him climb the stairs sometime after midnight, her shoulder supporting his weight as he stumbled on legs that felt foreign. He tried to sit up, and the world exploded into chaos. His vision blurred, dark spots dancing at the periphery. His entire body trembled with violent chills despite the fever raging beneath his skin. When he touched his chin, the pain was so intense that he nearly screamed. But worse than the pain was the sensation beneath his fingertips. The skin felt wrong, thick and cardboard-like, stretched over swelling that hadn't been there the night before. Sarah appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. She'd been awake all night, checking on him every 30 minutes, watching the infection's relentless march across his flesh. What she saw now confirmed her worst fears. Rob's complexion had turned waxy, almost gray. His lips were dry and cracked. When he looked at her, his eyes seemed unfocused, slightly glazed. She crossed to the bed and removed the bandage without asking permission. The wound had transformed overnight into something monstrous. The infected area now spanned nearly 5 inches, stretching from his chin, down his neck, and toward his collarbone. The center had turned black, truly black, like charred meat. Purple tendrils radiated outward from the central mass like a malignant sunburst, and the smell hit her immediately. That unmistakable odor of necrotic tissue, sweet and rotten and utterly terrifying. "That's it," Sarah declared, her voice shaking but resolute. "We're going to the hospital right now. This is not negotiable, Rob." He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. When he tried to stand, his legs buckled immediately. Sarah caught him before he hit the floor, staggering under his weight. The simple act of supporting himself seemed beyond his capability. His muscles had weakened dramatically overnight, the toxins released by the bacteria wreaking havoc on his entire system. Emma appeared at the bedroom door, still in her pajamas decorated with dancing unicorns. Her eyes widened at the sight of her father being held up by her mother, his face contorted in pain. "What's wrong with Daddy?" she whispered, her lower lip trembling. Sarah forced calm into her voice. "Daddy's very sick." "Sweetheart, we need to take him to the hospital so the doctors can help him. I need you to get dressed quickly." "Okay, and then I need you to go to Mrs. Henderson's house. Can you do that for Mommy?" Emma nodded, her small face serious with purpose. She disappeared down the hall to her room, moving with unusual, quiet efficiency. Sarah helped Rob sit on the bed's edge, then grabbed her phone. Her fingers trembled as she debated calling 911 versus driving him herself. The hospital was only 15 minutes away, but looking at Rob's deteriorating condition, she realized they might not have time to wait for an ambulance. She made the call anyway. Her nursing training took over as she explained the situation to the dispatcher, her voice clinical despite her terror. 42-year-old male, presenting with rapidly spreading soft tissue infection, possible necrotizing fasciitis, high fever, altered mental status, wound showing signs of tissue necrosis. She gave their address clearly, answered the dispatcher's questions with practiced precision. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but urgent. Ambulance dispatched. Keep him conscious. Do not let him fall asleep. 8 minutes. Sarah ended the call and turned back to her husband. Rob's eyes had begun to close, his chin dropping toward his chest. She grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently but firmly. "Stay with me. Rob, look at me. You need to stay awake." His eyes fluttered open, confusion swimming in their depths. "Sarah, what's happening to me?" His voice came out slurred, thick, like a man speaking through syrup. "You're going to be okay," she lied, fighting to keep her composure. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." Emma reappeared, dressed in mismatched clothes she'd chosen herself, her backpack over her shoulders. She approached the bed cautiously, her eyes fixed on her father's ashen face. "Is Daddy going to die?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. "No. Baby, the doctors are going to fix him. Now, I need you to go next door to Mrs. Henderson's house. Tell her what's happening. Can you be brave for Mommy?" Emma nodded solemnly. She approached her father, reaching out to touch his hand. "I love you, Daddy. Be brave." Rob's eyes focused momentarily, and he managed a weak smile. "Love you too, Princess. Daddy will be okay. Don't worry." Emma ran downstairs and out the front door. Sarah watched from the window as the 6-year-old crossed the lawn to Martha's house, her small figure determined despite her obvious fear. Within moments, Martha's door opened, and the elderly woman gathered Emma into her arms. Martha looked up toward the Mitchell house, and even from this distance, Sarah could see the alarm on her face. Then Martha was hurrying across the lawn, moving faster than a 78-year-old should, Emma's hand clasped in hers. The front door burst open, and Martha's voice carried up the stairs. "Sarah, Sarah, what's happening?" Sarah called down for her to come up. Martha took the stairs carefully but quickly, arriving at the bedroom door slightly breathless. What she saw stopped her cold. Rob sat on the bed, supported by his wife, his face the color of dirty chalk. His neck displayed an angry mass of blackened, discolored flesh that made Martha's stomach lurch, but it was recognition, not just horror, that crossed Martha's weathered face. 30 years as an emergency room nurse at Cleveland Clinic had shown her this exact presentation more times than she cared to remember. She'd treated gunshot wounds, car accident victims, and industrial accidents, but few things frightened her more than the sight before her now. "Oh, dear Lord," she breathed. "This is necrotizing fasciitis. Call 911 immediately." "I already did," Sarah said. "They're on their way." Martha crossed to Rob's side, her experienced eyes assessing his condition rapidly. His respiratory rate was elevated, breathing shallow and rapid, skin turgor poor, indicating dehydration, mental status altered, suggesting possible sepsis. And the wound itself, with its characteristic blackened center and spreading margins, confirmed her diagnosis. "How long has it been like this?" she asked Sarah, her voice steady despite her fear. "It started as a small pimple Thursday night. He popped it after the gym. By yesterday morning, it was red and swollen. I begged him to go to the hospital, but he refused. This morning, it exploded into this." Martha nodded grimly. "Stubborn fool," she muttered, then caught herself. "Sorry, dear. But if he'd gone yesterday, this might not have spread so far." Outside. The wail of sirens pierced the morning quiet, growing louder, closer. Emma, standing at the window in Martha's living room, watched with wide eyes as the ambulance turned onto Maple Street, lights flashing red and white against the gray sky. The paramedics were efficient and professional, moving with choreographed precision. They assessed Rob rapidly, their faces carefully neutral, but their eyes communicating urgency. One started an IV line, while the other took vital signs. Blood pressure, 90/60. Dangerously low. Heart rate 125 beats per minute. The heart working overtime to circulate blood through a compromised system. Temperature 100 to 4 degrees. Oxygen saturation 91%. Possible necrotizing fasciitis. The lead paramedic spoke into his radio, requesting surgical team on standby at Wexner Medical Center, patient presenting with severe soft tissue infection, signs of sepsis, altered mental status, ETA 15 minutes. They loaded Rob onto the stretcher with careful efficiency. Sarah insisted on riding in the ambulance, her nursing credentials giving her a position beside her husband. Martha promised to care for Emma, to bring her to the hospital later. As they wheeled Rob out the front door, Emma broke away from Martha and ran to the stretcher. "Daddy! Daddy!" Her voice cracked with terror. Rob turned his head, fighting through the fog in his mind to focus on his daughter's face. "Hey, Princess, Daddy has to go see the doctors now. You be good for Mrs. Henderson, okay? I love you. I love you too." "Daddy!" Her small voice trembled. "You have to come back. You promised to take me fishing." "I will, baby. I promise." Martha gathered the crying child into her arms, holding her tight as the ambulance doors closed. The vehicle pulled away, sirens screaming, carrying Rob Mitchell toward a fight for his life. Inside the ambulance, Sarah held Rob's hand, careful to avoid jostling the IV lines. His grip was weak, frighteningly so. "Stay with me," she urged. "Don't close your eyes." Rob's lips moved, forming words she had to lean close to hear. "Tell Emma. Love her. So much. Tell her." "You're going to tell her yourself," Sarah said fiercely. "You're going to be fine. The doctors will fix this." His eyes found hers, and for a moment, clarity broke through the fever. "I should have listened to you. I'm sorry." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Don't apologize. Just fight. Fight for Emma. Fight for me." She wanted desperately to tell him about the baby, to give him another reason to hold on. But fear kept the words locked in her throat. What if the knowledge became a burden rather than a motivation? What if he thought about everything he might miss and gave up? The ambulance raced through Columbus streets, every second counting. inside Rob's body. The bacteria continued their relentless assault, destroying tissue at an alarming rate. The toxins had entered his bloodstream, triggering a systemic inflammatory response that threatened to shut down his organs one by one. At Wexner Medical Center, Dr. Thomas Bradley had already assembled his team. The surgical suite stood ready, sterilized and prepared. Dr. Rachel Foster, the infectious disease specialist, reviewed the incoming patient information with grim determination. They'd treated necrotizing fasciitis before, knew its deadly potential, understood that timing was everything. When the ambulance doors opened and they wheeled Rob inside, both doctors moved immediately. The assessment was swift and brutal in its honesty. The infection had spread aggressively, and the necrotic tissue required immediate removal. Every hour of delay meant more tissue destruction, higher risk of sepsis, increased chance of death. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Bradley addressed Sarah as his team prepped Rob for surgery. Your husband has necrotizing fasciitis, commonly called flesh-eating bacteria. The infection is destroying tissue rapidly and has entered a dangerous phase. We need to operate immediately to remove all dead and infected tissue. Sarah nodded, her nursing knowledge filling in the terrifying details the doctor left unsaid. Dr. Foster continued, "We're starting him on aggressive intravenous antibiotics, but surgery is the primary treatment. We need to cut away everything the bacteria has touched. The infection has spread from his chin, down his neck, toward his shoulder and chest. Save him." Sarah whispered, "Whatever it takes." Bradley's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. Depending on how far the infection has spread into deeper tissues, we may need to make difficult decisions during surgery. If the infection has compromised his arm significantly, we might need to amputate to save his life." The word hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. Amputate Rob's right arm, the arm that lifted Emma onto his shoulders, the arm that built houses and held his family, the arm that represented everything he was as a man. "Is there any other option?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We'll do everything possible to save the limb," Bradley assured her. "But you need to prepare yourself. His life comes first." They presented consent forms, pages of legal language that blurred before Sarah's tear-filled eyes. She signed with trembling hands, authorizing the surgery, authorizing potential amputation, authorizing whatever measures necessary to save her husband's life. As they wheeled Rob toward the operating room, he grabbed Sarah's hand one last time. His eyes, clearer than they'd been in hours, locked onto hers. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "I love you. Tell Emma her daddy loves her more than anything." "You're going to tell her yourself," Sarah repeated, her voice breaking. "You fight. Rob Mitchell, you fight like hell." The doors closed between them, and Sarah collapsed into a waiting room chair, alone with her terror. She finally allowed the full weight of the situation to crash over her. Her husband might die. Her husband might live, but lose his arm. Her daughter might grow up without a father. Her unborn child might never know its daddy. She reached into her purse, fingers finding the pregnancy test she'd been carrying like a talisman. 2 pink lines that represented hope and future and family. Now, those lines seemed to mock her. a cruel reminder of all that hung in the balance. In the operating room, Dr. Bradley made his first incision, cutting into blackened flesh that smelled of death and decay. The battle had begun. Sunday morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the ICU windows, casting soft shadows across Rob Mitchell's hospital bed. Sarah had spent the night curled in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside him, her body aching, but her heart cautiously hopeful. The first surgery had lasted 3 grueling hours, during which Dr. Bradley and his team had meticulously removed layers of dead and infected tissue from Rob's neck and shoulder. They'd scrubbed the wound with antiseptic solutions, debrided every suspicious area, and started him on a powerful cocktail of intravenous antibiotics. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Rob's eyes fluttered open for the first time since surgery. His gaze wandered the unfamiliar room, confusion evident in his expression, until they landed on Sarah's sleeping form. He watched her for a moment, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the worry lines etched into her forehead, the way her hand still reached toward his bed, even in sleep. "Hey, beautiful," he croaked, his voice rough from the intubation tube they'd removed hours earlier. Sarah jerked awake instantly, years of nursing shifts having trained her to snap from sleep to alertness in seconds. When she saw Rob's open eyes, her face transformed with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. She was on her feet immediately, leaning over the bed rail, her hands finding his face with gentle reverence. "You're awake?" she breathed, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my God, Rob, you're awake." "What happened?" he asked, his memory of the previous day fragmented and hazy. "I remember the ambulance, maybe, and you crying, but everything else is just pieces." Sarah explained as simply as she could, her voice breaking occasionally as she recounted the terror of watching him deteriorate. She described the surgery, the hours of waiting, the moment when Dr. Bradley emerged to tell her they'd successfully removed the infected tissue. She left out the part about potential amputation, not wanting to burden him with what might have been. Dr. Bradley himself arrived at 7 o'clock, accompanied by Dr. Rachel Foster. Both doctors wore expressions of cautious optimism as they examined their patient. The surgical site, heavily bandaged, showed no signs of continued spreading. Rob's vital signs had stabilized significantly overnight. His blood pressure had climbed back to near normal levels. His heart rate had slowed to a healthier rhythm, and his fever had broken, dropping from dangerous heights to a manageable 100.2 degrees. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Bradley said, his professional demeanor softening slightly, "you gave us quite a scare, but you're responding well to treatment. The surgery removed all visible necrotic tissue, and the antibiotics are doing their job. Your white blood cell count has started to normalize." Dr. Foster added her assessment. "The cultures confirm Streptococcus pyogenes group A, which is typically responsive to the antibiotic combination we've prescribed. You're lucky Mrs. Mitchell recognized the severity and got you here when she did. Another 12 to 24 hours of delay could have been fatal." Rob's eyes moved to Sarah, gratitude and guilt mingling in their depths. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have listened." Sarah squeezed his hand, her grip fierce with love and residual fear. "You're damn right you should have. But we can discuss your stubborn streak when you're stronger." The doctors departed with instructions for the nursing staff to monitor him closely, promising to return for rounds in a few hours. Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly, the crushing weight of terror lifting just enough for her to breathe normally for the first time in days. At 9 o'clock, Emma arrived with Martha. The elderly woman had insisted on bringing the child to see her father, understanding intuitively that Emma needed visual confirmation that her daddy still lived. When the little girl entered the ICU room, her eyes immediately filled with tears of relief. "Daddy," she cried, running to the bedside with arms outstretched. Rob's heart clenched at the sight of his daughter. He couldn't lift his arms to embrace her, the movement pulling painfully at his bandaged wounds, but he smiled with all the warmth he possessed. "Hey, princess. Daddy's feeling much better today. I was so scared," Emma admitted. Her small hand finding his on the bed. "Mrs. Henderson let me sleep in her guest room, but I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about you. Well, I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere," Rob assured her. "Did you take good care of Mrs. Henderson for me?" Emma nodded solemnly. "She made me hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and told me stories about being a nurse. She said you were brave." Martha stepped forward, her weathered face creased with emotion. She looked at Rob with knowing eyes, seeing not just a patient, but a neighbor who'd shown her kindness when she'd needed it most. "You gave us quite a fright, young man," she said gently, "but you're made of tough stuff. I could tell that the day you fixed my roof." "Thank you for taking care of Emma," Rob said sincerely, "and thank you for recognizing what was wrong. Sarah told me you knew immediately what it was. 30 years in emergency medicine teaches you things." Martha replied modestly. "I've seen necrotizing fasciitis before. Recognized the signs right away. But you did the hard part, fighting through it. You're a survivor." Rob Mitchell. The morning progressed with an atmosphere of cautious celebration. Sarah allowed herself to eat for the first time in nearly 2 days. Martha, having brought homemade muffins that she'd baked at dawn. Emma sat in a chair beside her father's bed, coloring in a book she'd brought, occasionally looking up to confirm he was still there. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting IV drips, their demeanors noticeably lighter than the previous day's grim efficiency. At 10 o'clock, an unexpected visitor appeared at the ICU door. Marcus Thompson stood uncertainly in the threshold, his typically confident posture replaced by awkward hesitation. He wore casual clothes rather than his usual business attire, and his expression carried none of the competitive edge Rob associated with him. Sarah noticed him first and rose from her chair, surprise evident on her face. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Marcus stepped into the room, his eyes moving to Rob on the bed. "I heard about what happened. Word spread through the office yesterday. The boss told everyone. Now I just wanted to come by and see how he was doing." Rob studied his office rival with confusion. In 3 years of working together, they'd rarely exchanged words that weren't tinged with competition or criticism. They'd butted heads over project assignments, argued about methodologies, competed for recognition. Marcus had made snide comments about Rob's gym dedication, and Rob had criticized Marcus's shortcuts on job sites. Theirs was a relationship built on professional antagonism. "Look," Marcus began, clearly uncomfortable, "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but when I heard you were in the hospital with some kind of flesh-eating bacteria thing, I couldn't just sit at home and do nothing." He lifted a laptop bag from his shoulder, pulling out his computer. I set something up last night. Didn't know if it was appropriate, but I figured it couldn't hurt." He turned the screen toward Rob and Sarah. On the display was a GoFundMe campaign page. The header featured a photo of Rob from the company website, smiling confidently in his construction company polo. Beneath it, the title read, "Help Rob Mitchell Fight Flesh-Eating Bacteria." The description, written in Marcus's surprisingly heartfelt words, explained the situation and asked for financial support to cover medical expenses that insurance might not cover. But the number that made Sarah gasp was the amount raised, $12,000, accumulated in less than 24 hours. "You did this?" Rob asked, his voice thick with unexpected emotion. Marcus nodded, still looking uncomfortable with his own generosity. "I shared it on the company's social media accounts, texted it to everyone in my contacts, posted it on my personal pages." The response was immediate. "Our boss donated $5,000 himself, right off the bat. Other guys from work chipped in whatever they could. I even got calls from some clients asking how they could help." Sarah's hand covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Medical bills had been a looming specter she'd tried not to think about. ICU stays, emergency surgeries, specialist consultations, powerful intravenous antibiotics. These things accumulated costs that could devastate their carefully managed finances. The mortgage they worked so hard to pay, the savings they'd built for Emma's future. Everything hung in the balance. "Marcus, I don't know what to say," Rob managed, his voice catching. "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied quickly. "We fight at work, yeah. We argue about stupid stuff and try to one-up each other. But at the end of the day, you're still one of us. You're a good guy. Rob, a pain in the ass sometimes, but a good guy. And your family shouldn't have to worry about money while you're fighting for your life." Rob extended his hand weakly, and Marcus grasped it firmly. Something shifted between them in that moment. Years of petty rivalry dissolving in the face of genuine humanity. "Thank you," Rob said simply. "Really, thank you." Marcus nodded, releasing his hand. "Just get better, man. The office is too quiet without someone to argue with. Plus, I need you back so you can buy me a beer when you're healed." He managed a small smile that held no trace of his usual smirk after Marcus left. Sarah leaned over Rob's bed, her face wet with tears of gratitude. "People surprise you when it matters," she whispered. "He's not who I thought he was." Rob nodded slowly, his perspective shifting. "I misjudged him. All this time, I thought he was just arrogant and competitive. Never occurred to me that underneath all that posturing might be a decent person." The morning continued to bring positive signs. The nursing staff reported that Rob's wound showed no signs of spreading. His temperature dropped further. His appetite returned slightly, and he managed to eat a few bites of hospital breakfast. Dr. Foster visited again, confirming that the antibiotic regimen was working effectively. The bacteria were retreating. At 11 o'clock, Pastor David Williams from Grace Community Church arrived. The 62-year-old minister had served the Mitchell family's spiritual needs for over a decade, presiding over their wedding, baptizing Emma, counseling them through minor marital disagreements that all couples face. His presence brought a sense of calm and continuity, a reminder that their community extended beyond just neighbors and co-workers. Pastor Williams led a prayer beside Rob's bed, his deep voice resonating with faith and compassion. Emma bowed her head solemnly, mimicking the adults. Martha joined hands with Sarah, her lips moving silently in personal supplication. Even Rob, who typically approached religion with casual attendance rather than fervent belief, felt comforted by the ritual. The prayer chain started last night. Pastor Williams informed them after the Amen. Every family in our congregation is praying for your recovery. Rob, you're not fighting this battle alone. The power of community faith should never be underestimated. By noon, the GoFundMe had climbed to $18,000. Messages of support poured in from people Rob barely knew, from clients, from other contractors, from friends of friends. The story of his illness had spread through Columbus's construction community like wildfire, and the response demonstrated a solidarity he'd never imagined. Sarah stood at the window, watching rain begin to fall outside, feeling something she hadn't felt in days. Hope, real, tangible hope that this nightmare might actually end well. Rob was responding to treatment. His fever was down. The infection had stopped spreading. The community was rallying around them financially. Every indicator pointed toward recovery. She turned back to her husband, decision forming in her mind. Maybe now was the time to share her secret. He was stable, improving, surrounded by love and support. The news of the pregnancy might give him additional strength, another reason to fight hard in his recovery. She walked toward his bed, rehearsing the words in her mind. But before she could speak, a nurse entered the room. "Time for wound check," she announced cheerfully. Sarah watched as the nurse carefully removed the bandages from Rob's neck and shoulder. The surgical site looked raw but clean, the edges pink with healthy inflammation that indicated healing. The nurse nodded approvingly as she documented her observations. Then her expression changed. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me for just a moment," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of its previous warmth. She stepped out of the room quickly, and Sarah's blood ran cold. Something in the nurse's demeanor had shifted dramatically. Years of hospital experience told Sarah that quick exits and guarded expressions rarely preceded good news. Minutes passed like hours. Sarah stood frozen beside Rob's bed, her hand gripping his with white-knuckled intensity. Rob looked at her questioningly, but she couldn't find words to reassure him. Martha gathered Emma close, sensing the atmospheric shift. Pastor Williams stopped mid-sentence in his quiet conversation with the child. Dr. Bradley burst through the door, followed closely by Dr. Foster and 2 additional nurses. The surgeon's face wore an expression Sarah had seen before on medical professionals' face with devastating complications. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Bradley said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to examine the wound immediately." He didn't wait for permission. His gloved hands moved swiftly, removing more bandaging to expose a larger area of Rob's neck and shoulder. What he saw made his jaw tighten visibly. Sarah moved closer, and her heart stopped. Around the perimeter of the surgical wound, where healthy pink tissue had been just hours ago, new darkness was emerging, purple discoloration spreading outward from the original site. The infection hadn't been defeated. It had merely retreated temporarily, regrouped, and was now advancing again with renewed aggression. "The bacteria developed resistance," Dr. Bradley announced grimly. "It's back, and it's spreading faster than before." "But you said the antibiotics were working," Sarah protested, her voice rising with panic. They are. But this strain has adapted. This happens sometimes with particularly aggressive streptococcal infections. We need to change the antibiotic protocol immediately and prepare for a second surgery." Dr. Foster was already on her phone, ordering new medication combinations to be prepared. Nurses hurried to adjust IV lines, their movement sharp with urgency. "How bad is it?" Rob asked, his voice steady despite the fear flooding his system. Bradley looked at him directly. "The infection is now spreading toward your shoulder joint and chest. If it reaches your heart or lungs, the situation becomes immediately life-threatening. We need to operate again, and soon." Within the next 12 hours, Sarah's knees buckled, and she grabbed the bed rail for support. "No, please, no. We thought he was getting better. He was getting better." "I know," Bradley said, his voice heavy with sympathy, "and I wish I had better news. But we're not giving up. We're going to hit this with everything we have. New antibiotics, second surgery to remove more tissue. We'll fight this." Rob's hand found Sarah's, squeezing weakly. "We'll fight it together," he whispered. But even as he said the words, fear, like he'd never known, coursed through his veins. The respite had been false, the hope premature. The bacteria weren't done with him yet, and this time they seemed determined to take more than just his flesh. The clock on the ICU wall read 2:00 in the afternoon when Dr. Bradley delivered the news that shattered Rob Mitchell's fragile hope. The second surgery was scheduled for 8:00 that evening, giving the new antibiotic protocol 6 hours to slow the infection's aggressive advance. 6 hours that felt simultaneously like an eternity and a mere heartbeat. "You need to understand the situation clearly," Dr. Bradley said, his voice carrying the weight of countless difficult conversations with patients and families. "The infection has spread deeper into your shoulder tissues than we initially realized. The bacteria are consuming muscle and fascia at an alarming rate. When we operate tonight, we'll need to remove significantly more tissue than the first surgery." Rob lay in his bed, the fever returning with vengeance, his body trembling despite the warm blankets piled over him. "How much more tissue?" he asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. Bradley exchanged a glance with Dr. Foster before responding. "We'll try to preserve as much healthy tissue as possible. But if the infection has compromised your shoulder joint or entered your upper arm, we may need to make a difficult decision during surgery." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. Sarah's voice came out strangled. "You mean amputation? It's a possibility we need to prepare you for," Foster confirmed gently. "If removing your arm is the only way to stop the infection from reaching your heart and lungs, we'll have to make that choice. Your life takes absolute priority." Rob's world collapsed inward, his right arm, his dominant hand, the arm that built houses and lifted his daughter, the arm that defined his identity as a working man, a provider, a protector. The thought of losing it felt worse than death itself. Martha quickly ushered Emma out of the room, sensing the conversation was about to become too heavy for young ears. "I'll take her to the cafeteria for ice cream," she said quietly to Sarah. "Give you some time to process this." "Emma, sweetheart, let's give Mommy and Daddy a few minutes alone." Emma went reluctantly, looking back over her shoulder at her father with worried eyes. Sarah knelt beside the bed, but Rob turned his face away from her. When the door closed behind Martha and Emma, Rob finally spoke. his voice hollow. Maybe it would be better if I just didn't wake up from the surgery. Sarah recoiled as if she'd been slapped. "Don't you dare say that," she hissed, anger and terror mingling in her voice. "What kind of life will I have with one arm?" Rob continued, his words tumbling out in a rush of despair. "I can't work construction anymore. Can't provide for my family. Can't beg Emma or throw a ball with her or teach her to ride a bike properly. I'll be useless, a burden on everyone. You listen to me, Robert Mitchell," Sarah said fiercely, gripping his face and forcing him to meet her eyes. "You are not your arm. You are not your job. You are a father, a husband, a human being. Emma doesn't love you because you can carry her. She loves you because you're her daddy. And I didn't marry your arm. I married you." But Rob's spiral continued. "All my life, I've been told that a man provides, a man works with his hands, a man is strong. What am I without those things? Who am I?" "You're everything," Sarah insisted, tears streaming down her face. "You're everything to us. We need you alive, Rob. Do you understand alive? Whatever form that takes." The argument raged for several minutes, Rob's fear manifesting as despair while Sarah fought desperately to pull him back from the edge. Pastor Williams knocked softly and entered, having sensed the emotional turmoil from the hallway. His calm presence and gentle words of faith provided temporary balm. But the wound in Rob's spirit ran deep. At 3 o'clock, a new figure appeared in the ICU doorway, and Rob's breath caught in his throat. Kevin Mitchell stood there, his 78-year-old frame slightly stooped, but still carrying the bearing of a military man. His hair had gone completely white since Rob had last seen him 5 years ago, and deep lines creased his weathered face. He wore his faded Vietnam veteran jacket, the patches and insignia speaking of service and sacrifice from a lifetime ago. For a long moment, father and son simply stared at each other across the distance that 5 years of silence had created. "Dad," Rob whispered, disbelief coloring his voice. "What are you doing here?" Kevin stepped into the room. Slowly, his eyes taking in the machines, the IV lines, the bandages covering his son's neck and shoulder. "Sarah called me yesterday. He said," his voice rougher than Rob remembered, aged by years and regret, "told me you were dying. I drove straight here. 3 hours from Cleveland. Didn't stop once." Rob's jaw tightened with old anger, even as his heart ached with longing. "Why would you come? You disowned me. Remember? Told me I wasn't your son anymore because I didn't vote the way you wanted me to." Kevin's face crumpled, years of stubborn pride dissolving in an instant. "I was wrong," he said, his voice cracking. "So damn wrong, son. I let stupid politics come between me and my only boy. 5 years I wasted being too proud to admit I'd made a mistake. And now I might lose you without ever telling you that I'm sorry." He moved closer to the bed, and Rob could see tears tracking down his father's weathered cheeks. In 42 years, Rob had never seen his father cry. Not at his mother's funeral, not during war stories, not ever. Kevin Mitchell was carved from granite, emotionally impenetrable. But here he stood, weeping openly, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "I've been such a fool," Kevin continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "All those years I taught you to be tough, to never show weakness, to push through pain. And I was the weakest one of all. Too weak to swallow my pride and pick up the phone. too weak to admit that loving my son was more important than being right about politics, too weak to be the father you deserved. Rob's anger warred with the longing he'd suppressed for half a decade. Part of him wanted to rage at his father, to list every hurt, every missed birthday, every time he'd needed paternal guidance and found only silence. But another part, the part that still remembered fishing trips and workshop lessons and the solid presence of his father at Little League games. That part desperately wanted reconciliation. "You hurt me, Dad," Rob said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "You said terrible things. You made me feel like I was worthless because I didn't think exactly like you." "I know," Kevin admitted, moving to the bedside. "And I'll regret those words until the day I die. If you can't forgive me, I understand. But please, son, please let me be here. Let me try to make things right, even if it's too late." Sarah watched from across the room, tears streaming silently down her face. This was what she'd prayed for, father and son reconciling, but not like this, not with death hovering at the doorway. Rob looked at his father for a long moment, memories flooding through him. Kevin teaching him to throw a baseball, Heaven helping him build his first birdhouse, patient despite Rob's mistakes. Kevin clapping proudly at his high school graduation. Kevin dancing stiffly at his wedding, unaccustomed to such displays but trying his best. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Rob said honestly. Kevin nodded, pain etched in every line of his face. "Fair enough. I haven't earned forgiveness yet, but I want you here," Rob continued. "Despite everything, I want my father here." Kevin's hand reached out, trembling, and found Rob's on the bed, their fingers intertwined, bridging years of silence with touch. "I love you, son," Kevin said. "I've always loved you, even when I was too stupid and proud to show it. You're everything I'm proud of. A good man, a good husband, a good father. Everything I tried to teach you, you learned better than I ever knew it. I love you too, Dad." Rob whispered, "I've missed you. Every day." They remained like that for several minutes, hands clasped, tears falling, years of hurt, beginning the slow process of healing. Sarah moved quietly to give them space while still remaining present, her heart simultaneously breaking and mending. But the moment of peace shattered when Sarah's purse, sitting open on the bedside table, suddenly tipped. Kevin, reaching to steady it, accidentally knocked its contents across the floor. And there, lying conspicuously on the sterile tile, was the pregnancy test Sarah had been carrying like a talisman. Kevin bent to retrieve the fallen items, and his hand closed around the small plastic stick. He stared at it, his aged mind taking a moment to process what the two pink lines signified. His eyes widened, and he looked up at Sarah with shock evident in his expression. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's face drained of color. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell Rob, the perfect time when he was stronger, when the crisis had passed, when hope wasn't so fragile. But now, with the test exposed and Kevin's questioning eyes upon her, she had no choice. "Sarah," Rob said, having witnessed the exchange, "what is that?" She moved to the bedside, her hands shaking as she took the test from Kevin. She'd imagined this moment so differently. Candles at dinner, happy tears, excited planning for the future. Not in a hospital room, not with her husband facing potential amputation, not with death breathing down their necks. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely audible. 8 weeks. I was going to tell you on our anniversary. I wanted to surprise you." Rob stared at her, his mind struggling to process this additional information on top of everything else. Pregnant, a baby, another child, a future he might not be alive to see. "We're having another baby," he said slowly, as if testing the words. Sarah nodded, tears falling freely now. "I found out 2 weeks ago. Took 3 tests to be sure. I've been carrying this one around, looking at it, imagining how happy you'd be." Kevin's weathered face transformed with emotion. A grandchild. Another grandchild I might actually get to know this time, if we can fix what's broken between us. But Rob's reaction wasn't the joy Sarah had anticipated. Instead, his face crumpled with anguish. "A baby," he said, his voice breaking. "A baby I might not live to see, or a baby whose father has only one arm. What kind of father can I be?" Sarah grabbed his face again, forcing eye contact. The best kind. The kind who loves their children more than anything. The kind who would give anything for their family. The kind who fights to stay alive for them. Kevin added his voice to hers. "Son, I raised you with one good ear. You remember that lost most of my hearing in my left ear in Vietnam. Still managed to be your father, even if I wasn't perfect at it. Disability doesn't define you unless you let it." But the weight of it all crashed down on Rob like a collapsing building. The infection, the potential amputation, his estranged father suddenly present, a baby on the way, his daughter who needed him, the medical bills mounting, the uncertainty of survival. Every emotion he'd suppressed for 42 years came flooding out in a torrent. He began to sob. Great heaving cries that shook his injured body, all the pain, all the fear, all the years of being strong and stoic and unbreakable. It all shattered at once. Sarah climbed onto the bed carefully, mindful of his wounds, and held him as he wept. Kevin stood beside them, his hand on his son's shoulder, his own tears falling freely. "I'm so scared," Rob admitted between sobs. "I've never been this scared in my life. I don't know if I can do this." "You can," Sarah whispered fiercely. "We can, together, as a family." Kevin added, "However broken we've been, we're family." For 20 minutes, they remained huddled together. 3 people bound by blood and love and shared terror. The machines beeped their steady rhythms, marking time that suddenly felt precious and fleeting. Finally, Rob's sobs subsided, leaving him drained but somehow lighter. The act of releasing all that pent-up emotion had created space for something else to enter. Not quite hope, but perhaps the shadow of determination. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he admitted quietly. "Then we'll be strong for you," Sarah said, "until you find your own strength again." She placed his hand gently on her still flat-at stomach. "Fight for this baby," she urged. "Fight for Emma. Fight for us." Rob felt the warmth of her skin beneath his palm. Imagined the tiny life growing there, the future they'd planned together. And somewhere in that moment, a small flame of resolve flickered to life in his chest. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'll fight." Kevin squeezed his shoulder gently. "That's my son." But even as Rob made this promise, the clock continued its relentless march toward 8 o'clock. In less than 4 hours, he would face the surgeon's knife again, and this time the outcome remained terrifyingly uncertain. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Martha Henderson requested a private meeting with Dr. Bradley and Dr. Foster. The elderly woman had been quiet since returning Emma to Sarah's care, her weathered brow furrowed in deep thought. Something had been nagging at her since she'd first seen Rob's wound. A memory from her decades of nursing experience struggling to surface through the fog of retirement years. The doctors met her in a small consultation room adjacent to the ICU. Martha sat straight-backed in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression one of determined purpose. "I apologize for taking your time when I know you're preparing for surgery," she began, her voice steady and professional. "But I have 30 years of emergency room experience at Cleveland Clinic, and I've seen necrotizing fasciitis cases before. Many of them." Bradley nodded respectfully, recognizing the authority of experience. "Please, Mrs. Henderson, any insight you have would be valuable." Martha leaned forward slightly. "In the 1990s, we had a particularly aggressive outbreak of streptococcal infections. Several cases presented exactly like Rob's, with resistant strains that didn't respond to standard antibiotic protocols. We lost patients despite our best efforts." Foster's interest sharpened. "What changed your outcomes?" "A doctor from Johns Hopkins was consulting with us at the time." Martha continued. "He'd been researching combination therapies for resistant soft tissue infections. He suggested something that went against conventional wisdom at the time." She paused, gathering her thoughts carefully. "He recommended hyperbaric oxygen therapy in conjunction with surgical debridement. The theory was that by saturating the patient's tissues with pure oxygen under pressure, we could slow the bacterial progression significantly. These particular bacteria thrive in low-oxygen environments. Flooding the infected area with oxygen essentially poisons them, while simultaneously promoting healthy tissue regeneration." Bradley and Foster exchanged meaningful glances. "We have a hyperbaric chamber here," Foster said slowly. "We use it primarily for diabetic wound healing and decompression sickness. But the research on its effectiveness for necrotizing fasciitis has been promising, if not conclusive. I watched it save limbs that every textbook said should be amputated," Martha said firmly. "Not every case, but many. If you're considering taking that young man's arm, I'm asking you to try this first. Give his body every possible advantage before making such a permanent decision." Bradley stood, pacing the small room as he considered. "The surgery is scheduled for 8 o'clock. That gives us roughly 3 hours. Enough time for 2 90-minute hyperbaric sessions." Foster calculated quickly. "If we start immediately, what are the risks?" Bradley asked his colleague. "Minimal, compared to the potential benefit," Foster admitted. "Oxygen toxicity is possible, but unlikely with proper monitoring. The patient is stable enough to tolerate the chamber, and frankly, if it slows the infection even marginally, it could mean the difference between saving his arm and losing it." Bradley was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks, considering protocols. Finally, he turned to Martha. "Mrs. Henderson, your suggestion has merit. We'll proceed with hyperbaric therapy immediately." Martha's eyes glistened with relief. "Thank you, Doctor." "That young man fixed my roof out of pure kindness. Let me help fix him." Back in Rob's room, the doctors presented the new plan. Rob listened with exhaustion etched in every feature, barely able to process more medical terminology. But Sarah understood immediately, hope flaring in her chest. "It's worth trying," she said eagerly. "Anything that might save his arm." Kevin nodded vigorously. "Do it. Give my son every chance." By 5:30. Rob was being wheeled toward the hyperbaric medicine department. The chamber looked like something from a submarine, a clear cylindrical tube with monitoring equipment arranged around it. Technicians explained the process carefully, ensuring Rob understood what would happen to him. He would breathe pure oxygen at increased atmospheric pressure, saturating his tissues with oxygen molecules that would theoretically inhibit the bacterial growth. The first session began at 5:45. Rob lay in the chamber, a mask over his face, delivering pure oxygen, pressure slowly increasing around him. Through the clear walls, he could see Sarah, Kevin, and Martha watching anxiously. Emma had been taken to the hospital's family room with Pastor Williams, spared from witnessing this strange medical procedure. Inside the chamber, Rob's thoughts wandered. The oxygen felt strange in his lungs, thick and heavy. His ears popped repeatedly as the pressure changed. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on positive thoughts. Emma's laugh, Sarah's smile, his father's unexpected return, the baby growing in Sarah's womb. At 6:15, during a brief break between sessions, Dr. Foster approached Rob's bed with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been reviewing your case extensively. I need to ask you something important. When exactly did you first notice the pimple?" Rob thought back through the fever-hazed memories. "Thursday evening, after my workout at the gym. I noticed it in the locker room mirror. And before that, any cuts or wounds in the days preceding?" Rob's mind traveled backward, sorting through the week's events. Then it struck him with sudden clarity. "Monday," he said. "I was fixing my neighbor's roof. Mrs. Henderson's roof. I got a small cut on my chin from the old tin roofing material." Foster's eyes widened. "That's it. That's the entry point. The gym pimple wasn't a pimple at all. It was the beginning of infection from the cut you sustained 3 days earlier." The realization hit Rob like a physical blow. The kind act that had brought him such satisfaction, helping an elderly widow in need, had been the source of his near-fatal illness. The irony was almost too cruel to comprehend. "So when I popped what I thought was a pimple," Rob said slowly, "I was actually pushing bacteria deeper into my tissue." "Exactly," Foster confirmed. "The bacteria likely entered through that roofing cut, began multiplying over the following days. And when you broke the skin barrier by popping it, you provided a highway for deeper infection." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The good deed, helping Martha, led to this. But Martha, standing nearby, shook her head vigorously. "No, dear, don't think of it that way. The infection was random misfortune. But now that same connection, Rob helping me, is what's giving him a fighting chance. I recognize the symptoms because of my experience. I suggested the hyperbaric therapy because of what I learned in my career. The circle is completing itself." Rob stared at the elderly woman, her words penetrating the fog of fear and despair. "What goes around comes around," he murmured, echoing something she'd said before. "Precisely," Martha said firmly. "You sowed kindness, and kindness is being returned to you, not in the way any of us expected, but returned nonetheless." The second hyperbaric session began at 6:30. This time, Rob entered the chamber with a shifted perspective. The randomness of tragedy was being balanced by the intention of care. His neighbors, his community, even his estranged father, they'd all rallied around him not by chance, but because of the connections he'd built through years of decency. When the second session ended at 8 o'clock, Dr. Bradley examined the wound with intense scrutiny. His expression remained neutral, professionally guarded, as he assessed the infection's current state. Foster stood beside him, making notes, checking measurements. The spreading has slowed significantly, Bradley finally announced, not stopped entirely. But the rate of progression has decreased by approximately 70% compared to this morning. Is that enough? Sarah asked desperately. Enough to save his arm. Bradley met her eyes honestly. It's encouraging, very encouraging. The hyperbaric therapy has bought us time and advantage. The bacteria are weakened, but I can't make promises. We'll know more during surgery. At 8:15, they prepped Rob for the operating room. This time, the atmosphere felt different. Less like a last resort and more like a strategic battle. Emma was brought in for a brief goodbye, her small face serious with understanding beyond her years. "Daddy, be brave," she said, echoing words from yesterday. "I love you so much." Rob kissed her forehead with chapped lips. "I love you too, Princess." More than all the stars in the sky. Sarah leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. "Our baby needs their father. Come back to us whole." "I'll try," he whispered. "I'll try so hard." Kevin clasped his son's hand firmly. "You're a Mitchell. We don't give up. We fight until we can't fight anymore. And then we fight some more." Rob nodded, drawing strength from his father's words, finding the old pride in his heritage that had been complicated by their estrangement. Pastor Williams offered a final blessing, his deep voice resonating with faith and conviction. "The Lord's hand is upon you, Rob. He works through the skilled hands of these doctors, through the love of your family, through the wisdom of neighbors. Trust in His plan." Finally, Martha stepped forward, her weathered hand gentle on Rob's arm. "You fixed my roof when I had no one else to turn to. You did it without asking for anything in return. That's who you are. Rob Mitchell. A man who helps, who cares, who puts others before himself. That goodness is your strength. Carry it with you into that operating room." Rob looked at the circle of faces surrounding him, each one representing a different aspect of his life. His daughter, innocent and trusting, Huti. His wife, strong and devoted to his father, humbled and hopeful. His pastor, faithful and steady. His neighbor, wise and grateful. And beyond them, he knew Marcus was updating the GoFundMe page, which had now climbed to $45,000. Co-workers were sending messages of support. The entire community was holding him in their thoughts. "I'm ready," he said finally. They wheeled him through the sterile corridors toward the surgical suite. Sarah walked beside the gurney until the doors marked the boundary beyond which she couldn't follow. One last kiss, one last look, one last squeeze of hands. The operating room gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights. Dr. Bradley, gowned and gloved in sterile blue, stood ready beside his surgical team. Anesthesiologist at the head of the table, nurses prepared with instruments, monitors beeping their steady rhythms. "Mr. Mitchell," Bradley said as they positioned Rob on the table, "we're going to take excellent care of you. Trust us to make the best decisions for your survival and quality of life. Save my arm if you can, Rob said, his voice steady despite his fear. But save my life first. My family needs me alive. Bradley nodded with solemn understanding. That's exactly what we intend to do. The anesthesiologist placed the mask over Rob's face. Count backward from 100. 100, Rob began, Sarah's face floating in his mind's eye. 99, Emma's laugh echoing in his memory. 98, his father's reconciling words warming his heart. 97, the baby he'd never met but already loved. 96. Darkness claimed him gently, carrying him away from pain and fear into dreamless oblivion. Bradley picked up his scalpel, his experienced hands steady despite the weight of responsibility. The first incision cut through weak and diseased tissue. What he found as he explored the wound made him pause momentarily. The hyperbaric therapy had indeed slowed the bacterial assault. The margins between healthy and infected tissue were clearer than he'd expected. For 3 hours, he worked with meticulous precision, removing every trace of infection he could identify. The bacteria had damaged muscle tissue, destroyed sections of fascia, and threatened the shoulder joint, but they hadn't penetrated as deeply as he'd feared. The oxygen saturation had created a barrier of sorts, weakening the invaders enough that the body's own defenses, aided by powerful antibiotics, could mount an effective counterattack. When Bradley finally stepped back, his surgical mask hiding a tired but satisfied expression, Rob's right arm remained attached to his body. Damaged, yes, requiring extensive rehabilitation, certainly, but present, intact, saved. Let's close him up, Bradley said to his team. We got it all. Monday morning broke with golden sunlight streaming through the ICU windows, painting warm stripes across the sterile floor. Rob Mitchell's eyes leathered open at 6 o'clock, his consciousness emerging slowly from the deep well of anesthesia-induced sleep. The first thing he registered was the absence of the burning pain that had consumed him for days. The second thing was the sound of gentle breathing nearby. He turned his head carefully, wincing at the stiffness in his neck, and found Sarah asleep in the chair beside his bed. Her hand rested on his arm, fingers loosely curled around his forearm even in sleep. Beyond her, Kevin dozed in another chair, his chin resting on his chest, soft snores escaping his slightly parted lips. And in the corner, Martha Henderson sat upright, her eyes open, watching Rob with knowing wisdom. "Welcome back, young man," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth that transcended their neighbor relationship. Rob's eyes moved down his body, searching, desperately hoping. His right arm lay at his side, heavily bandaged from shoulder to elbow, but unmistakably present. Tears welled immediately, spilling down his cheeks in streams of profound relief. "My arm," he whispered. "They saved my arm." The sound of his voice woke Sarah instantly. Her eyes flew open, registering her husband's consciousness with explosive joy. She was on her feet immediately, leaning over him, her hands framing his face gently. "You're awake," she breathed. "Oh, God, Rob, you made it. The surgery was successful. They got all the infection, and they saved your arm." Kevin stirred, his aged body protesting the uncomfortable sleeping position. When he saw his son's open eyes, his weathered face broke into the widest smile Rob had ever witnessed on his father's countenance. "There's my boy," Kevin said gruffly, emotion thickening his voice. Knew you'd pull through. Mitchell men are fighters. Dr. Bradley arrived at 7 o'clock for his morning rounds, and his expression carried undeniable satisfaction. The surgery exceeded our expectations. He informed them. The hyperbaric oxygen therapy weakened the bacteria significantly, allowing us to identify and remove all infected tissue without needing to sacrifice major structures. Your shoulder joint is intact, and while you've lost some muscle tissue, the core functionality of your arm should be preserved. DeFoster added her assessment with equal optimism. The antibiotic regimen is working beautifully now. Your white blood cell count has normalized, your fever is gone, and we see no signs of recurring infection. You're out of the woods, Mr. Mitchell. How long until full recovery? Sarah asked, her nursing mind already planning ahead. Physical therapy will be crucial, Bradley explained. You're looking at 3 to 6 months of intensive rehabilitation to regain strength and mobility. The scarring will be significant, and you'll likely have some permanent cosmetic changes. But functionally, with dedication to therapy, you should regain 80 to 90% of your original arm capability. Rob processed this information with overwhelming gratitude. 6 months of therapy seemed like nothing compared to losing the limb entirely. Scars were badges of survival, not marks of shame. Emma burst into the room at 9 o'clock. Having been brought from the waiting area where she'd spent the night with Pastor Williams, her small body launched itself toward the bed, stopping just short of impact as she remembered her father's injuries. Daddy, you're awake. Your arm is still there. Rob reached out with his left arm, pulling his daughter close. Hey, princess, Daddy's going to be okay. The doctors fixed me up good. Emma's eyes were bright with tears of happiness. I prayed so hard. Mrs. Henderson taught me special prayers, and Pastor Williams said God was listening. He certainly was, Kevin added, his voice carrying new reverence. He answered every single one. The day progressed with a steady stream of visitors. Marcus Thompson returned with his laptop, showing Rob that the GoFundMe had surpassed $250,000. The story had gone viral on social media, shared thousands of times with the caption about the danger of popping pimples. Local news had picked up the story, and the outpouring of support from complete strangers left Rob speechless. This will cover all your medical bills with plenty left over for the baby, Marcus said. His former rival attitude completely dissolved. The construction community rallied hard for you. Man, I don't know how to repay everyone, Rob said honestly. Marcus shrugged with genuine sincerity. You don't repay it. You pay it forward when someone else needs help. That's how this works. Pastor Williams arrived at noon with a delegation from Grace Community Church. They brought flowers, cards signed by hundreds of congregation members, and a promise of meals delivered to the Mitchell household for the next 3 months. The love was tangible, almost overwhelming in its intensity. 1 month later, Rob walked out of the hospital on his own 2 feet. His right arm hung in a supportive sling, the healing wounds still tender but closed and clean. Sarah held his left hand while Kevin carried their bags. Emma skipped ahead, her joy irrepressible. The house on Maple Street looked different to Rob now. The same modest colonial, the same tree-lined street, the same neighbors waving from their porches. But he saw it through transformed eyes. Every element represented something precious he'd nearly lost. Martha Henderson waited on their front porch with fresh-baked apple pie. just as she had done the day this nightmare began. But this time, the simple gift carried layers of meaning neither could fully articulate. "Welcome home," she said simply. Rob crossed to her slowly, his movements careful but determined. He wrapped his good arm around her frail shoulders in a gentle embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for recognizing what was wrong, for suggesting the treatment that saved my arm, for caring for Emma, for everything." Martha patted his back gently. "You helped an old widow when no one else would. I just returned the favor." 3 months passed with steady progress. Rob attended physical therapy 3 times weekly, pushing through pain and frustration with determination born from nearly losing everything. His right arm grew stronger gradually, regaining functionality through countless repetitions of seemingly simple movements. Opening a jar, lifting a book, eventually carrying Emma on his shoulders again, though only for brief periods. Sarah's pregnancy progressed beautifully. Her morning seasickness faded, replaced by the healthy glow of second trimester wellness. The ultrasound revealed a boy. Perfectly formed and growing strong, they named him Kevin Michael Mitchell, honoring Rob's father and cementing the reconciliation that had emerged from tragedy. Kevin himself became a permanent fixture in Columbus, purchasing a small apartment 20 minutes from Rob's house. He visited daily, making up for 5 years of absence with devoted presence. Emma adored her grandfather, and Kevin discovered joys of grandparenting he'd feared he'd never experience. The scarring on Rob's neck and shoulder healed into thick, ropey lines that he would carry forever. The first time he looked at them in the mirror without medical dressing, he'd expected to feel self-conscious. Instead, he felt pride. These scars represented survival, community, reconciliation, and renewed appreciation for life's fragility. Marcus and Rob developed an unexpected friendship, their workplace rivalry transforming into mutual respect. They grabbed beers together monthly, discussing work and life with an openness neither had possessed before. Marcus became godfather to the unborn baby, an honor that surprised everyone but felt completely right. The medical bills arrived gradually, totaling nearly $200,000 after insurance adjustments. But the GoFundMe surplus covered everything, with money remaining for baby expenses and a college fund for both children. Strangers who'd never met Rob had contributed to securing his family's future. 4 months after discharge, Rob returned to work part-time. His company had held his position, supporting him through disability leave without hesitation. His role shifted slightly, focusing more on project management and less on hands-on construction. But he remained valued, still contributing to building things that mattered. Sarah continued nursing, her experience with Rob's illness adding depth to her patient care. She understood now, in visceral ways, how families felt when loved ones faced medical crises. Her empathy, always strong, became legendary among her patients 6 months after the nightmare began. Rob stood in his backyard at the family's welcome home barbecue. Kevin manned the grill expertly, sharing war stories with Pastor Williams. Martha sat in a comfortable lawn chair, Emma at her feet listening to tales of nursing adventures. Marcus tossed a football with some of Rob's co-workers, laughter carrying across the grass. Sarah approached Rob, her belly now prominently rounded at 7 months pregnant. She slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed gently with his right hand, still weaker than before but functional and present. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Rob looked around at the gathering, taking in every face, every laugh, every moment of connection. "Grateful," he said simply, "more grateful than words can express." He touched the scar on his neck unconsciously, tracing the raised tissue with his fingertips. The gesture had become habit, a tactile reminder of mortality and grace. "Best scar I ever got," he said, echoing words he'd spoken to Sarah weeks before. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, "because it brought everyone back together, because it taught me what really matters." Rob amended. "Family, community, kindness. Not pride, not stubbornness, not trying to be tough all the time. Just love and connection." Kevin wandered over, a spatula in his hand and a genuine smile on his face. "These burgers are almost ready. You two lovebirds going to join the party or stand there making us all jealous?" Rob laughed, the sound free and joyful. "Coming, Dad?" The word felt natural now, not weighted with old resentments. Kevin heard it too, his eyes softening with gratitude for second chances. Emma ran up, her face sticky with watermelon juice. "Daddy, Grandpa says I can flip the next burger. Can I? Please?" Rob scooped her up with his left arm, his right hand steadying her back. "Sure, Princess, but be careful. Those grills are hot, I know. Daddy, I'm careful about everything now because you taught me out of the mouths of babes," Pastor Williams called out, having overheard. "The child speaks wisdom." Martha raised her lemonade glass in agreement. "To second chances and lessons learned." They gathered around the picnic table as the afternoon sun painted everything golden. Food was passed, stories were shared, laughter echoed across the yard. Somewhere in the bustle, Rob caught Sarah's eye and held it for a long moment. Words weren't necessary. The look communicated everything they'd survived, everything they'd learned, everything they had to look forward to. That night, after guests had departed and Emma was tucked into bed, Rob stood before the bathroom mirror. He examined his reflection carefully, seeing the man he'd become through the crucible of near death. The scars on his neck and shoulder stood out prominently, permanent souvenirs of his battle. But he also saw strength in his eyes that hadn't existed before. Wisdom earned through suffering, humility forged through helplessness, gratitude born from almost losing everything he loved. Sarah appeared behind him, her reflection joining his in the mirror, her arms wrapped around his waist from behind, her pregnant belly pressing against his lower back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Rob smiled at their reflection. "About how I almost died from popping a pimple, about how stupid and stubborn I was, about how I nearly let pride kill me. And now I know better. Now I listen when you tell me something's wrong. Now I don't wait to say I love you. Now I help neighbors and appreciate that goodness returns in unexpected ways. Now I understand that being strong doesn't mean suffering alone." Sarah kissed his shoulder, right on the edge of his scarring. "You've always been a good man, Rob Mitchell. You just needed reminding that good men can be vulnerable too." He turned to face her, his hands cradling her face gently. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for fighting when I wanted to quit. That's what we do for the people we love." He kissed her softly, reverently, with gratitude that transcended words. In a few months, their son would arrive, joining their family at a time when all wounds, physical and emotional, had healed into strength. The scar on his neck itched slightly, as scars sometimes do when touched by memory. Rob scratched it absently, no longer bothered by its presence. "Best scar I ever got," he repeated. "Because it saved your life," Sarah offered. "Because it taught me how to live." Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to realize we already had everything we needed. Rob Mitchell learned this lesson the hardest way possible, through a nightmare that began with 3 seconds of carelessness and a stubborn refusal to listen. But what saved him wasn't just modern medicine or skilled surgeons. It was the wife who refused to let him dismiss her concerns. It was the elderly neighbor who recognized the danger because he'd taken time to fix her roof. It was the estranged father who drove 3 hours to say the words he'd held back for 5 painful years. It was the workplace rival who set aside petty differences to organize help. It was the community that rallied around a family in crisis, proving that none of us are ever truly alone. We spend so much of our lives building walls, nursing old grudges, postponing reconciliation, and convincing ourselves we're too strong to need help. We tell ourselves we'll call tomorrow, we'll apologize next week, we'll visit next month, but tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Rob's story reminds us that a single moment can change everything, that our pride and stubbornness can cost us dearly, and that the connections we nurture today become our lifelines when crisis strikes. What grudge have you been holding that might not matter as much as you think? What words have you left unsaid to someone who needs to hear them? Share your thoughts below, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today.